Before these drugs were introduced in the market, people who had these conditions would not have been given any drug at all. And so it is the branding of a disease, and it is the branding of a drug for the treatment of a disease that did not exist before the industry made the disease.
Case in point, shyness, a common life situation, voted by psychiatrists into their diagnostic and statistical manual under the name social anxiety disorder.
You know, people are nervous. Well, they come up with, say, social anxiety disorder. SAD, they'll call it SAD.
And the connotation is that everybody ought to be happy, and that here's a drug that can make you happy. So that a common occurrence, which is every now and again everybody's sad, we ought to be treating with a drug.
Well, then they'll get this PR firm to drum up business for this. They'll put out all these studies that find, you know, there's so many people afflicted with this SAD, you know, and they'll start putting it in magazines, they'll start putting it on TV, they'll start a patient advocacy group that say, you know, that we're all affected by this, and then they'll come out with Paxil works for this. So they go to the FDA and they said, well, we ran this study and this works for this new invented disorder, and that is SAD, social anxiety disorder, and millions of people suffer from it. And it's purely fictional. It's a normal human emotion that everybody experiences at certain times or another, but they make it into a disease.
Paxil, once it got approved by the FDA as the first antidepressant to be used for social anxiety, it took off huge. And it just moved from number 3 in the market amongst its peer drugs to number 1 in the market.
Social anxiety disorder is just one of many made-up psychiatric disorders fueling the boom in psychotropic drug prescription.
Psychiatrists work to promote what the latest disease is going to be. These days, bipolar is getting that same type of promotion.
Everybody's being educated about their bipolar illness, when in fact, we know having emotional ups and downs is distinctly human.
Now bipolar is thrown around like water. You've got bipolar, I have bipolar. I'm up today, I'm manic. If I go home tonight and I'm depressed because I'm tired, that shows I have bipolar disease. It's a lot of hokum.
Have you ever worried with seeing all the increased media on it that you might have a mental disorder?
Yes.
And which one is that?
I would say bipolar. You know, they talk about bipolar a lot.
Bipolar. I've known a lot of bipolar.
2 friends from both of them were like diagnosed with bipolar.
My neighbor, she was bipolar. I was diagnosed with bipolar.
My mother had bipolar.
He was actually bipolar. Schizophrenic bipolar. Bipolar and obsessive compulsive. Bipolar and ADHD. Bipolar disorder. Bipolar, yeah. Bipolar situation. Bipolar. Bipolar.
Bipolar.
Bipolar.
Bipolar.
There are 3 personality disorders, and then the most recent is bipolar. And that's just been in the past year.
Spearheading the popularizing of bipolar disorder, especially in children, is psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Biederman, a paid speaker, advisor, and researcher for 25 different drug companies.
In 1996, the drug companies funneled all this money to this Dr. Biederman. He's well known. He's the one that came up and said that there's bipolar disorder in little kids. This was unheard of. There was no bipolar disorder in any kids. He came up with the study and published the articles out all over the world, and other doctors followed his lead that bipolar is in little kids.
Due to the constant promotion by Dr. Biederman and his colleagues, there has been a 4,000% increase of the diagnosis of bipolar in children since 1994, while the number of antipsychotics prescribed to them has leaped 5-fold to an estimated 2.5 million prescriptions. In 2008, Dr. Biederman was exposed by a Senate investigation for failing to report $1.6 million in personal income from pharmaceutical companies. But the damage had been done. Because of the bipolar fad created by Dr. Biederman, antipsychotics, some of the most powerful psychotropic drugs being prescribed, are psychiatry's drug of choice. The top 3 best-selling antipsychotics together gross $25,000 every minute. And no matter how big the psychotropic drug industry gets, psychiatrists are hard at work providing the diagnoses to make it even bigger.
Let's say this is the pie right here of a certain class of medications, and this is a pretty profitable pie, and everybody wants a piece of that pie. But what would happen if we made that pie even bigger? And how you make the pie even bigger is by expanding the uses for those drugs.
They've already got a drug that's approved on the shelf. They can just pull it off the shelf, rename it, repackage it, and say, look, we've got a new drug for a new illness.
When Prozac's patent ran out, that Eli Lilly had to look for a new source of profits. So all they did was change the name of the drug from Prozac to Serafem, changed the color of the pill from green to pink, and marketed it for PMDD, which is newly introduced into this book.
What it tells us is that if you can come up with a label, a diagnostic label for a drug, then you can sell it like hotcakes.
It's a business model, and it's $1 billion business model, and it works, and it's going to keep continuing.
Today, anyone may unknowingly be taking a psychiatric drug, renamed, repackaged, and prescribed for non-psychiatric purposes. Zyban, prescribed as a cure for smoking, is actually the antidepressant Wellbutrin. Cymbalta, a psychiatric drug for depression and anxiety, is now being marketed as Yentreve for urinary incontinence. Psychiatric researchers are testing psychotropic drugs on such wildly varying conditions as obesity, alcoholism, gambling, hot flashes, herpes, nausea, itching, shivering, and excessive hair pulling. It is a pill for every ill, and practically no one is being told how dangerous psychiatric drugs are.
As a chemist, I'm making these drugs. They're proving deadly in our labs, and they're proving deadly in other labs. Dangerous, ineffective, causing the exact same thing they're supposed to treat. How are they selling them?
For anyone who's given a label of a psychotic illness, drugs seem to be the automatic choice of treatments as night follows day.
That's all psychiatry does. It's dominated by psychopharmacologists who do nothing but manage symptoms by dispensing pills. That's it. And they don't work. But the fact that they don't work works to the advantage of the drug companies and the psychiatrists, which means that you're not cured, which means that you're a patient for life, you're a customer, you're a client for life. And the worse your health gets, the more drugs you need. It's a great deal for them.
We should all be up in arms about the way we're being treated by psychiatry today. This is a very dangerous industry that has gone so far overboard in inventing fictitious diseases and drugging our children and our population that I consider it to be engaged in crimes against humanity.
With over $80 billion a year in psychiatric drug money at stake, it is impossible to escape the saturation of psychiatric disease-mongering in today's society. But behind the marketing lurks a secret psychiatry's customers would be shocked to learn. How are these drugs tested? And are they safe?
No one knows precisely how these psychiatric medications act.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
There's not a great deal of scientific support for using them.
I myself try to pick a drug whose side effects might be useful.
You have to choose what is the best option.
We don't have sure methods.
There are no rules. Everything it's an art, really.
Often it's trial and error.
It's kind of a trial and error.
It's trial and error.
Some degree of trial and error, I guess.
A blind man's bluff or something like that.
You never know if it's the right drug.
It's a much more complex subject.
There's always going to be huge surprises, and that's what makes it so difficult. The best psychiatrists in the world will mess up all the time.
The American public is being treated as a mass medical experiment. We are all being treated like guinea pigs by the pharmaceutical companies, the psychiatric industry, and the FDA.
They are basically testing drugs on large parts of the population
without really knowing what the results are going to be.
It's a very dire situation that we're facing. We're talking about people's health and in many situations people's lives. These are very serious issues.